your boy, the one and only Sir Patrick, the Department of Biology. Welcome to Lecture 9. Here, we'll talk about your Phaeophyceae.
So yeah, this time we're going to talk about the division Heterophyta. More specifically, we're just going to focus on the class Phaeophyceae, or your brown algae. So before we start, I would like to make it clear, and I just like to lay it out there in the public, that we're going to focus only on your class Phaeophyceae. Because first of all, majority of the economically important one, specifically for the case, especially for the case of the Philippines, belongs to the class Phaeophyceae, or your brown algae. And also because this is on a more personal note, I don't have a certain expertise on discussing all of those mind-blowingly complicated groupings and taxonomic classification, including your chromalveolates, including your apicomplexans, your dinoflagellates, your pelagophytes, even your haptophytes, and your cryptomonads. And I would like to say it out there that those organisms are a hell of a mess. And some of those organisms, for example, your apicomplexans and your dinoflagellates, are still indeed unranked. Their taxonomic status is still unranked up to this day. Yeah, mind-blowingly complicated indeed. Anyway, let's still move on with our discussion on your brown algae. Shall we? So your Heterocontophyta is called Heterocontophyta because they have two distinct heterocont, or two distinct flagella. So the two distinct flagella of your Heterocontophyta is usually one that is one of those flagella is usually a whiplash flagella, and the other one would be a tinsel or the hairy flagella. Again, your whiplash flagella is the naked one, and your tinsel flagella is the hairy one. So in terms of hairiness, the division Heterocontophyta can have one whiplash flagella, that's a naked flagella, and one hairy flagella. Or it can also have in terms of size, it can have one flagella that is longer and one flagella that is shorter. So let's longer, shorter flagella of just one organism. I-connect natin. Yes. So the division Heterocontophyta again is based on the presence of two different flagella. It can be a whiplash and a tinsel flagella, or it can be a smaller and a longer, or a shorter or a longer flagella. So let's move on with our discussion. So before we go beyond the realms of your Phaeophytes, let's first have the overview of the outline of our course for today. So we'll have first the overview, then we'll move on to the basic cellular structure of your Phaeophytes, and then we'll move on to the more exciting parade of taxa of different representative groups under your Phaeophyceae. Then on your overview of your Phaeophytes, we'll have first the basis of classification, the classification and phylogeny, the much more important one, and the diversity of forms and adaptation that your Phaeophytes has, and its distribution across the globe. So let's first discuss your overview of your Phaeophytes. The basis of classification. Again, getting back on our favorite journal material that we always reading material here of your Patrick Keeling, Again, remember, we have this table right here. And where is your Heterocontophyta or your class Phaeophyceae located? It is located here in between your alveolates and your chromist, therefore known as your chromalveolates. Okay, so where is your Phaeophytes? There are your brown algae. That's your Phaeophytes. They are grouped alongside with your diatoms and your pelagophytes. These three can be considered part of your heterocontophytes, right? These are your loosely known as your heterocontophyta. But yeah, they belong to the kingdom chromalveolates or the kingdom chromista. Okay, so that is your overview of your or where our Phaeophytes are located in our Patrick Killings tree. And in terms of the basis of classification, mostly your Phaeophytes has a chloroplast with pore membrane. Because remember, these organisms arise from the secondary endosymbiosis of your red algae. So the representative heterocontophytes or Phaeophytes ate a red algae and did not digest it and retain that red algae inside them. So secondary endosymbiosis. Let's talk about the origin of your chrome alveolates. Your the chromo in the chrome alveolates here would retain would that's would refer to the color. Sorry about the arrow. So the chromo in the chromoalveolates here, or the chrome alveolates here, would refer to the color that most of your chromalveolates has. And your alveolates in the name would then refer to the what we call alveolar sac or the invagination. So let's just write it here. Alveolar sac. Alveolar sac. So the alveolata or alveolate name here refers to the presence of an alveolar sac in the morphology of most chromalveolates. What we mean when we say alveolar sac, it is essentially the invagination of your plasma lemma or your plasma membrane, which usually serves for storage of certain material. Okay? And most organisms under your Phaeophyceae also have cellular plasmodesmata, and we all know what cellular plasmodesmata's purpose is, which is to enhance cell-to-cell communication. Because most of your Phaeophytes are multicellular organisms. So moving on with this figure again, let's go back to that figure again of Patrick Killing. We can see here that your Phaeophytes or your heterocontophytes evolved from a very distinct lineage. So very distinct lineage from different from other chromists and other alveolates. And scientists think that they evolved more recently because most of them look similar in structure and form. Plus, they also have a very advanced structures that aren't present in most organisms, in most algal lineage per se. So your organisms here is very recently evolved. Your Phaeophytes are very recently evolved in terms of evolutionary time scale. Okay, so we already discussed what chromist means, what alveolates mean, and what heterocont means. And your Phaeophytes, remember, these are your brown algae. Okay, so let's just have a review. If you recall, the entirety of our class revolves around the phylogeny and this figure right here. We tried our best to discuss each and every one of your algae representative inside this Patrick Killing's tree, this tree right here in front of you. And let's just cross most of the things that we encountered. We encountered your charophytes, that is closely related to your land plants. Yes. We encountered your chlorophytes in lecture 7, your green algae. And we also encountered your rhodophytes, your red algae, in lecture, I think, 8. And we also encountered your glaucophyte, the transitional representative organism for that is very important for photosynthesis, the evolution of photosynthesis, especially in eukaryotic organism. We are now discussing your Heteroconthophyta, but we will focus only on your brown algae. We discussed the diatoms that are found in most freshwater and marine habitats in our laboratory portion. We did not discuss your pelagophytes, so yeah, that's a sad thing to but we tried to touch some of the representative in our first 4 lectures of your pelagophytes, but they are not that important anyway. We already discussed your dinoflagellates. I mean, in a way, because most of these are kleptomaniacs or kleptoplastids. Yeah, they steal plastids of different algae too, or different algae in their environment when they eat them, and they are the ones that undergo serial endosymbiosis. And we also managed to discuss some members of your apicomplexans. Although these organisms right here, your apicomplexans, your dinoflagellates, your haptophytes, your cryptomonads, your euglenids, and your chlorarachniophytes, we didn't discuss them in details because most of them are not that important in terms of when we think of the macroscopic algae representative. That's why we didn't dive in well in them. Okay, so if you look at this chart right here again, if you look at, for example, your heterophytes right here, we have your brown algae, your diatoms, and your pelagophytes. So essentially, in the more recent evolutionary terms, these heteroconthophytes belong to your chromist. Okay, they belong to the chromist group. When you look at, for example, if you search them on the Catalog of Life, which is the most approved or recognized tree of database for the tree of life. If you look on the Catalog of Life, type nyo lang Catalog of Life, papakita na yan sa net nyo. Doon pwede kayo mag-search. Very very updated, and yun usually yung ginagamit namin. So when you look at the Catalog of Life, your Heteroconthophyta, it's actually not called Heteroconthophyta, but more of a synonym of your Ochrophyta. What they use is Ochrophyta. Ochrophyta. Yeah, Ochrophyta or Heterophyta. When you type Heterophyta, it will not show up on the Catalog of Life, but it is synonymous to your Ochrophyta. Okay, this is a phylum under your kingdom Chromista, according to the Catalog of Life. And under that Ochrophyta, there are a lot of classes, but there is your brown algae, your Phaeophyceae, the one that we're going to focus right now. And we also have your diatoms or your Bacillariophyceae. Remember, diatoms, that's your Bacillariophyceae from our laboratory discussion on the diatoms. And we also have your pelagophytes, but it's not called pelagophytes in the Catalog of Life. It is more akin to, yeah, let's just write them. Ochrophyta, Basilario Oh man, it's hard to write. Phaeophyceae. So let's just, may CE pa yan dyan sa dulo, but hindi kinakasya. So yeah, Bacillary Phaeophyceae, these are your diatoms, and we also have your pelagophytes, but it's not a pelagophytes in the catalog of life. It is called, let's write it here. Nagiging O yung aking D. Oh my God. Bakit? Bakit naging O? Ayan. So it's called, it's synonymous, your pelagophytes is synonymous to your Dictyochopaceae. Yes. So your heteroconts would include your Ochrophyta, your Bacillophyceae, and your Dictyopiceae. So yeah, your brown algae, Ochrophyta, your diatoms, your Bacillophyceae, and your pelagophytes, your Dictyochopaceae. Bacillophyceae, Phaeophyceae, Dictyopiceae. All of these belong to your phylum Ochrophyta and or Heterocontophyta, and they belong to the kingdom Chromista or your chromist. So kingdom Chromista, phylum Ochrophyta / Heterocontophyta, then Bacillophyceae, Phaeophyceae, Pelagophyceae, or synonymous to Dictyopiceae. So those are your Ochrophyta or your Heterocontophyta. Now, your euglenids is more or less related to protozoans. So, protozoans na to si euglenids. At hindi na din natin, nabanggit-banggit lang natin si euglenids, but hindi natin siya finocus masyado sa course natin na ito. So, yeah, this is a protist. Ano ba tayo niya ng P? So, yeah, protist, kingdom protozoa, yung kinabibilangan ni euglenids. So, kingdom protozoa under the phylum Euglenozoa. And your, sino pa ba yung mga hindi natin nabanggit? Si haptophytes and your cryptomonads, for example. Under pa rin sila ng kingdom Chromista, but they are of a different phylum. So, ka-level niya yung mga yung Ochrophyta natin. Okay? So, ayan, mali pala no, na inilagay ko dito si Ochrophyta. Si Ochrophyta kasi is a phylum, no? Hindi siya family katulad ni Bacillophyceae at Dictyopiceae and Phaeophyceae. Phaeophyceae is your brown. Okay? So, yeah, your haptophytes and your cryptomonads is also a phylum, no? But hindi na siya cryptomonads. Phylum haptophyta pa rin, but hindi na phylum cryptomonads. It's phylum Cryptista, tapos Cryptophyceae. But these phylum are para siyang ka-level lang ng Ochrophyta natin or ng mga Heterocontophyta natin. Then your sino pa ba? Si Apicomplexans. Yeah, ito na yung mga mahihirap. Si Apicomplexans at si Dinoflagellates. Yung mga Apicomplexans natin, still under your kingdom Chromista, and they're also under the phylum Myozoa. So, Myozoa naman sila. Higay natin. Nagiging salamin. Myozoa. So, phylum Myozoa na sila, pero hindi din siya taxonomically accepted yung ating Dinophyceae at yung mga Apicomplexans natin. No? Unranked din ang mga ito. So, phylum, sino pa ba? Phylum Haptophyta, phylum Cryptista, Apicomplexa na unranked, Dinophyceae or Dinoflagellates na unranked din. And your chlorarachniophytes, ito din, sobrang hirap din itong hanapin. No? Yan yung isa pa sa pinaka-problematic na grouping. Kasi, but some references would say it's under your Cercozoa, no? Under daw siya sa Cercozoa. Yung iba sinasabi under siya ng Rhizaria, yung iba sinasabi under pa siya ng Plantae, but sabi nila under Cercozoa siya. But still, in the Catalog of Life, it is still unranked. Hindi nyo mahanap ang mga chlorarachniophytes doon. So, baka gusto nyo i-resolve yung problem na yon at maging maayos na yung phylogeny or yung taxonomic status ng ating chlorarachniophytes. But yeah, those are the problems with these three. So yeah, more or less we tackled most of them, except for apicomplexan, dinoflagellates, haptophytes, cryptomonads, euglenids, and chlorarachniophytes, the lesser important ones. So right now we're going to focus on your brown algae. Now, we have, again, let's just define what your chromalveolates are. Your chromalveolates, these are a monophyletic. Ayan, sabi niya dito, kung nababasa niyo, medyo dark siya. Monophyletic yan with the plastid that comes from secondary endosymbiosis of your red algae. But most of the organism here, aside from these, has lost the ability to photosynthesize. I mean, some pala din ng most apicomplexan then they lost the ability to photosynthesize. So that's your chromalveolates. Again, your chromalveolates is this portion, this entire portion here, chromo, color, alveolata, alveolar sac. Your heterochonts, ito lang siya, no? Or yung ochrophyta. Nagiging O yung C. Nagiging O siya. Ok. Sige, isipin nyo lang yan. Hindi. Okro. Ayun. Yun. Ganun pala dapat ang A. Hindi mo ikakabit. Anyway, so those are your ochrophyta. And these heterochons, ayan, sabi niya dito, they are dimorphic. They have dimorphic flagella. Yung dimorphic flagella na yan, it's either in the form of having two different sizes of flagella or minsan magkasama pa nga. But two different sizes of flagella or different hairness in flagella or absence of hair or presence of hair or your mastigonyms. Yeah, if you remember in your first lectures, man, mastigonym, flagella. But yeah, these dimorphism in dimorphic flagella na to, they can either be short na whiplash or naked na flagella pero shorter. Tapos yung usually yung longer na flagella, ito yung hairy or mabalbon. Okay? And we also have, ayan, they can have what we call a tripartite mastigonym. Usually involves 17 classes but hindi na natin inisa-isa lahat. No? Madami pang mga members ng chromist at ng ating ochrophyta pero hindi natin binanggit lahat yun dito. Sinocus lang natin si Phaeophyceae, the brown algae, Basilarophyceae at yung iba pang mga Phyceae under your diatom groups and your Pelagophyceae or your Dictyostrophyceae. Anyway, moving on with our, ayan, paalala lang natin yung ating mastigonyms na tinatawag. This is the tripartite na flagella or mastigonym. This is your lateral hairs in your flagella. Diba? Ito yung may lateral hairs sa flagella natin. Ang tawag natin dyan, mastigonym. Nagiging araw, nakakainis. Ayan. So, naalala nyo pa. Kung naalala nyo pa si Mastigony. And again, kung maalala nyo, yung same size na to, yung ating mga Heterocontophyta can either have this form right here kung saan parehas yung size ng ating flagella pero yung isa ay tinsel or hairy, yung isa ay naked. Or pwede siyang ganito yung klase kung saan yung whiplash ay maliit, yung isa ay hairy na mahaba. Okay? So, ganyan yung pwedeng mangyari. Tapos ito yung ang ganda ng gupit niya, si Stepanocon. Na-mention natin sa Chlorophyceae noon. Okay, in terms naman of the classification and phylogeny on the basis of the different characteristics of your heterocont, again, i-mention natin, they have two chloroplast ER kasi nga secondary endosymbiosis ulit ito. They have thylakoids in bands of 3. No? Tatlo-tatlo yung thylakoids nila. They have small glucose residues. Meron silang cresol laminarin in their vacuoles. Their cell covering, dahil nga it would also include your diatoms. So your heteroconts would have siliceous frustules na gawa sa silica, malamang. And may cell wall din sila. They have organic loricas. Sometimes they have scale, mucilage, or pwede ding naked yung cell covering ng mga heteroconts mo. Yung mga heteroconts natin, in terms of pigments, they have chlorophyll A and chlorophyll C. They also have fucoxanthin na unique sa mga heteroconts. Their mitochondria, as you remember, have a tubular form of cristae. So ito yung mga cristae natin na nabanggit na. Okay, so sa mga phaeophytes naman, no, sila naman yung may fucoxanthin din at yung merong tinatawag silang Phaeophycean tannins. Mamaya mababanggit natin kung anong purpose ng mga Phaeophycean tannins na ito. Sila din ay merong chlorophyll A at different types of chlorophyll C, chlorophyll C1 and chlorophyll C2. They also have laminarins. They have no unicellular, yung mga phaeophytes natin, wala silang unicellular or colonial type of cytomorphology. Of morphology, I mean. They have filamentous representative and pseudoparenchymatous to parenchymatous representative. Mamaya makikita natin yung iba't ibang mga itsura nila and yung order. There are 20 orders inside your phaeophytes. But if focus lang natin sila focales, si laminariales, si dictyotales, at ectocarpales. Ito lang yung mas mga importanteng groups or orders na kailangan natin mabanggit mamaya. Okay, so let's move on to the diversity, forms, and adaptation that different groups took to survive in this world. So, ngayon, there are at least 1,800 species that is ranked and accepted in the taxonomic community. There are very few or rare freshwater species of this group. There are only 4 genera that is exclusively found in freshwater environment. There are also few species that can be found in brackish water, although this representative has no sexual reproduction or does not perform sexual rep. Okay, so there's also higher diversity in terms of diversity in hotter and colder water. There is higher diversity in colder water when it comes to your Phaeophyceae. Now, in terms of form, we already discussed that most of them are multicellular. Since in your Phaeophytes, there are only multicellular representative. There are no unicellular or colonial organisms under this. No? And the largest species that is ever recorded, largest algae species that is ever recorded, can reach lengths of up to 30 to 60 meter in length, or at least 100 feet. Nagiging arrow yung 100 feet. So, masyadong malaki talaga yan. And these organism that is very large, the largest species of your algae, this is your giant kelp, no? Yung giant kelp natin na tinatawag. This is the giant kelp. Or si Macrocystis. Yun natin. Macrocystis. Okay, so si Macrocystis, underline natin, ito yung largest species or si giant kelp, no? At dahil sa laki din ng organism na ito na umaabot ng 100 feet or 30 meters to 60 meters in length, no? Diyan nagpupulupot yung mga sea lions or otters, I think, kapag natutulog sila para hindi sila dalhin ng alon. But yeah, these large kelp forests are, dahil nga sobrang lalaki nila, there is a need for internal tissue differentiation to enable the photosynthetes that is produced up top to be distributed across the entire body of your algae. So yeah, these giant kelp forms somewhat, if you imagine the seed cells, yung mga seed cells natin na tinatawag seed cells. So kung imagine niyo yung seed cells ng normal plant, ng mga trees natin, 'di ba? Meron silang seed cells na 'yan. So yeah, they also have that seed cells, yung mga giant kelp natin. So para silang mga puno na talaga or mga giant plant na talaga. So they have that internal tissue differentiation, much like similar to your gymnosperm, for example. So meron silang mga seed cells or yung mga trumpet cells na tinatawag, and these enable them to transport certain materials across their gigantic forms. No, their giant forms. Seed cells or trumpet cells. So yan, yung mga yan. Other adaptations that they have is the formation of dense covering, especially when they are present in intertidal zone, lalo na yung mga tropical species natin. Since most of them are epiphytic in nature, meron din naman tayong organisms, lalo na sa mga temperate forests, yung nabanggit nga natin kanina, yung mga giant kelps that form underwater kelp forest. Ito yung sa mga temperate regions naman, wala to sa Pilipinas. In the Philippines, we can only see sargassum. Yung mga sargassum lang yung makikita natin. But also in other areas at the Atlantic Ocean, you can also see a community of floating sargassum, no? Mga sargassum, mga brown algae na nagfo-float across the ocean, no? Nagbe-bathe sa sun, no? Because these organisms have what we call flotation bladders. So yung flotation bladders na yan ay importante for these organisms, these sargassum species to float across the surface. Mamaya makikita natin yung flotation. Yung flotation bladders kung paano sila na-form. So tissue differentiation din yan. Okay? Now in terms of distribution, most organisms in temperate regions are large, no? Malalaki yung mga species na makikita mo in temperate region. But yung in tropics, you can only see smaller organism, smaller representative. So scientists still are debating on what could be the reason why in the tropics there are smaller brown algae, but in the northern or temperate region there are larger representative of the same genus, for example. Yung mga sargassum doon mas malaki compared sa tropics. So hindi nila alam kung ito ba ay dahil sa time or mas matagal lang yung development doon. So, mas madaming time for the organism to grow. Unlike in the tropics na sobrang bilis mag-divide kasi nga ano yung temperature, something like that. But also, in your northern or the temperate region, mas diverse din or mas mataas yung diversity of your brown algae as compared to your tropical regions of the world. So, ayan, kung makikita nyo, ito yung mga brown algae forest na sinasabi ko, mga sargassum community na makikita sa makikita nyo sa tawag dito sa makikita nyo sa Atlantic Ocean, for example, or minsan pa mas magandang makita yung underwater view ng mga giant crabs na malaki talaga yung dahon. Ayan, kaya brown yung ginamit ko, malaki yung dahon nila. Ang cute nila. Tapos may nagsiswimming doon na mga mammals, no? Aquatic mammals. Now we'll move on to the basic cellular structure, starting with the cell wall. So in terms of cell wall composition, we have most brown algae have a fibrillar component that is also composed, just like the similar to most already discussed. They have cellulosic fibrillar component. In their amorphous component, they have alginic acid, MNC naman. No? They also have phocoidan in the amorphous component of their cell wall. Although some species exhibit a high degree of calcification, for example, in Padina species, in the Padina genus, they have this deposition of calcium, and this form a concentric rings around the ear-like pattern of your Padina. So, concentric rings yung makikita mo. These are called argonites, which is a carbonate material, no? Calcium carbonate material na deposit in those concentric rings of your Padina. Okay. Ang social. So, in terms of the presence of plasmodesmata, for again, these are present in most parenchymatous organism. And why is that? And what's the purpose of your plasmodesmata? It's for cell-to-cell communication. It's usually is bounded by your plasma lemma or your cytoplasm, no? Ayan, bounded by your plasma lemma or in close contact with your plasma lemma. So it can either be arranged into what we call primary pit field, like in your pragmoplast. Remember, in our chlorophytes, meron tayong pragmoplast type, di ba? Pragmoplast type in your chloroplast. And it can be arranged in a primary pit field na andun lang lahat ng mga plasmodesmata. But it can also be scattered alongside your cell wall or alongside your organism. I mean, the connection between cells. So yeah, scattered or arranged into what we call primary fields. These are like connections of plasmodesmata or holes. No, parang collection sila ng holes. We also have a continuity of your protoplasm in your plasmodesmata. So as you can see here, this is the pathway through which the cytoplasms are connected in between cells, and that's your cell wall, and that's your vacuole right there. Yep. Those are your plasmodesmata. Again, it's important for cell-to-cell communication. That's why we're talking about them here. Now, in terms of the membranes of your chloroplast membrane, most organisms under your phaeophytes have 4 outer membrane that covers your chloroplast. Again, remember, the 4th outer chloroplast ER here is connected to the nuclear's outer membrane too, or the ER, or the mismong endoplasmic reticulum. Diba? Kung maaalala nyo. Kasi, ayan, kung makikita nyo dito, ayan, diba? Kasi product sila ng secondary endosymbiosis na kumain ng red algae. And that's why, dahil nga produkto sila ng secondary endosymbiosis, they have the phagosomal membrane na nagfo-form ng chromosomal the 4th outer chloroplast ER natin. So produkto sila ng secondary endosymbiosis of a red algae. Again, remember Patrick Keeling, readings natin. So, in terms naman nung DNA nung ating chloroplast, the first algal DNA, no, si red algae DNA, nung sequence din nila, nakita nila that the majority of the first algal DNA is retained in most representative. It is linear sometimes and circular in nature and is usually attached to your thylakoids. So in terms of pigments, nabanggit natin, they have chlorophyll A, C1, and C2, yung kanilang chloroplast. In terms of, and also fucoxanthin na unique sa kanila. Again, fucoxanthin. And yung storage product nila is laminarin. They also have other storage products like mannitol that is also used for osmoregulation. Again, parang ano lang yan, pag in-increase mo yung mannitol concentration sa loob mo, essentially, na-increase mo yung parang water activity inside you. Or, yeah, parang naka-counteract mo. Parang solute water balance lang yung nangyayari dyan. So, yeah, mga parang isipin nyo, parang siyang salt na nilagay mo sa loob. Parang gano'n. No? Ganun yung purpose niya for osmoregulation. Now, in certain condition where there is a high organic uptake, in certain condition when there is a presence of blue light, usually mataas yung inorganic uptake ng mga organism natin under your Phaeophyceae. Kasi remember in the spectrum of visible light, si blue light siya yung mas high in energy. That's why kapag may mga mataas yung blue light na nare-receive nila, tumataas din yung inorganic uptake ng mga organism natin na to. We also have, still in your chloroplast, we have your pyrenoid. Ano naman yung pyrenoid natin? Ano nga ba yung pyrenoid? Ito yung pyrenoid natin. Ayan siya. Yung pyrenoid natin is still, no? It's a spherical structure na parang may stalk, parang siyang stalk na paganyan, no? Parang connected pa rin siya kasi. Ano ba yan? So, parang siyang stalk na connected pa rin dun sa iyong chloroplast, no? So, kung iisipin nyo, it is still inside your chloroplast. Still inside your chloroplast. Yung pyrenoid natin. So, ganyan yung itsura ng pyrenoid bodies sa ating mga phaeophytes. In terms naman of the flagella and eye spot, so unahin natin yung flagella, no? In terms of flagella, so magkaiba usually yung, so hatiin natin. So in terms of location, usually yung tinsel ay makikita sa anterior portion. Lagyan natin ant na lang for short, in short. Ay, naging star yun. What? Ay. So, anterior portion makikita yung tinsel flagella. Yung whiplash flagella usually makikita sa posterior portion. Sa posterior portion siya makikita. Usually perpendicular to the organism. Yung length, in terms of length naman, yung tinsel flagella, dahil nga heterocotophyta to, longer usually yung hairy. Longer siya. And shorter naman yung ating whiplash flagella or yung naked flagella. Walang hair. Nakalbo. Okay. In terms of description naman, siguro sa itsura, kalimitan sa mga tinsel flagella ay merong tripartite na mastigonim. Ay, naglag siya. So, tripartite mastigonim. And yung isa naman, usually, may swelling lang. So, tripartite. So, para siyang isa, tapos paliit, tapos paganyan. Tapos yung isa, usually, parang ganyan lang siya. may swelling lang at the base. May swelling lang at the base. And usually, itong swelling at the base na to, nandyan din close association yung photoreceptor. So, andyan, ayan yung flagella mo, yung short flagella na whiplash, andyan yung photoreceptor, at itong photoreceptor na to ay ginagamit for phototaxis. Phototaxis, di ba? Yeah, ganyan yung itsura niya. Yung ating mga fucalis naman, sila lang yung exception. Kasi yung mga fucalis natin, they have, in their zoospores, yung ating mga focales, they have, nabaliktad sa kanila. They have the longer whiplash, but shorter yung tinsel flagella ng mga fucalis representative natin. In terms of eye spot, usually may 40 to 80 lipid globules na makikita sa mga eye spot na to. Yung location ng mga eye spot na to, usually it is found between the outermost thylakoid band. And it also is still in the chlorophyll membrane. Chloroplast membrane. In terms of function, again, yung eye spot natin is for phototaxis and is able to detect light wavelength. So, ano nga ba yung itsura? Ayan, pakita na lang natin siguro para makita yung itsura. Ayan, they have a longer whiplash, tinsel. They have shorter whiplash flagella. Asan yung ating eye spot? So, usually, andito yung photoreceptor natin, andyan, near the base of your flagella na enlarge or swelling, may swelling sa, 'di ba, sa end. So andyan yung ating photoreceptor, yung lipid globules natin andito siya. Yan, lipid globules. Ito yung ating chloroplast right here. So that's your lipid globules, that's your chloroplast, that's your photoreceptor at the base of your this flagella right here, the whiplash flagella. And syempre, ito talaga yung totoong itsura niya. So, moving on with your plorotannins or Phaeophycean tannins. So, ano nga bang purpose ng mga Phaeophycean tannins? Itong mga Phaeophycean tannins na to ay makikita sa tinatawag nating physodes or yung parang mga vesicles ito. Ito yung mga vesicles. So, ito, for example, this is a physode. So, isa siyang vesicle. Ay, ang galing. Naging siyang ganun. So, vesicle, yan. Vesicle yan. Nasa loob niyan yung mga Phaeophycean tannins, yung plorotannins natin. So, anong ginagawa ni plorotannins or yung mga Phaeophycean tannins? These are the colorless and usually they are formed from the Golgi apparatus, pinapackage yan doon or napuproduce yan doon, yeah, and in the perinuclear area. And usually, ang function nila is to deter, kasi, ayan, kung makikita nyo, yung, ayan, yung mga, itong mga phycopane na to, yung mga phycopane na yan, yung mga darker na mga globules, that's your phycopane kasi readily oxidized yan, kaya darker black yan. Ay, naging heart yung B. So, mga black yan. What the? Black, yeah. So, ay, double A na. Tama ba, spelling ko ng black? Black yan. Okay. So, yeah, yung ating phycopane, ito ay usually black in color kasi they are readily oxidized. Readily oxidized na mga Phaeophycean tannins. Ang purpose ng mga ito, ng mga Phaeophycean tannins na to, di ba kung kapag sinabi mong tannins, tapos kung nakatikim ka ng wine, pag nakatikim ka ng wine, tapos usually semi-dry yung wine or social na wine, mga ganyan. Mas pangit ang lasa ng mga ganun na wine, no? Or yung mga dry na wine. Dahil sa mas mataas na concentration ng mga tannins. So, yun yung nagpapapakla or nagpapasama ng lasa ng wine, no? Yung mga tannins na yan. But, or nagpapaganda din ng kulay ng wine, no? So, yung mga tannins natin. But in this case, so parang ganun din yung function niya. Pero we come to love the tannins in our wines. But yung tannins na to, yung Phaeophycean tannins na to, ang purpose niya is to deter, no? Parang to deter herbivory. Kasi they have this distinct astringent taste in them. They also perform other function like they absorb inorganic matter in their environment, and they are the major component in your cell wall. No? So, para siyang yung lignins and tannins din na katulad sa mga gymnosperm natin na dinedeposit nila sa kanilang bark, for example, sa walls nila kapag mamatay na yung cell to produce this cell wall component for protection. Okay, yeah, that's your Phaeophycean tannins or your plorotannins. In terms of life history, there are major differences between organisms. Meron tayo yung mga organism that forms unilocular sporangium. So parang ito siya. So isang locule ang meron na sporangium. Again, magpo-produce yung sporangium na yan ng spores, zoospores. So yung zoospores na yan ay for reproduction, no? Yung mga gametophyte naman, kung maalala nyo, ito yung haploid na organism. What the? Ano nangyayari sa N? N. Kaya mo yan. Yay! Perfect! So, gametophyte yan yung haploid, no? At usually, yung mga gametophyte na yan, microscopic yan. Lagyan na lang natin, microscopic. And yung, ito namang, so, meron tayong unilocular sporangium, meron tayong mga nagpo-form ng gametophyte generation, at meron tayong mga nagpo-form naman ng, parang sporangium din, pero plurilocular sporangium, ang tawag natin is Platymotalus yung tawag. So, ganito yung itsura niya. So, nag-divide to at magpo-form din ng zoospore. Ito yung sa case ng ating mga kaya mo yan. P spa naglalag na siya. Ayan. Yes, sir. Now, in times of meron naman tayong iba't ibang klase ng growth, no? They are quite diverse in terms of the type of growth that we can see. Meron tayong iba't ibang klase. Yung una na babanggitin natin dito is yung tinatawag nating diffuse type of growth. This is for the case of your ectocarpus. Pag sinabi nating diffuse type of growth, like in your ectocarpus, most of the cells inside your organism here, kung sa amang parte yan, ay meristematic in nature. Now, the next example of your type of growth is your apical type of growth. No? This is for the case naman of our, I think this is Hydroclatrus something. Or cervicornis something. Anyway, makikita natin ito mamaya. So, para tandaan nyo na lang kung ano siya. So, it's your apical portion that is only the meristematic portion. The apical portion is only the meristematic portion. So, it will divide and it essentially will differentiate into different types of cell and will mature. So, only the apical portion here are the meristematic portion and is responsible for the growth of this organism. We also have what we call trichothallic for example, in your Cattleya. So, pag sinabi naman natin trichothallic, usually the anterior portion, so para siyang, isipin nyo, para siyang ganyan, no? Para siyang, ito yung portion, anterior portion ng organism mo. Yung anterior portion, para siyang nagiging hair. No? The anterior cells usually elongates and become hair-like in nature. So, kung makita nyo yan, yung anterior portion niya ay nagiging hair-like portion or hair-like in appearance. Dahil yan sa kakaibang klase ng division na meron, yung tinatawag nating periclinal or periclinal type of division. Ito yung, for example, in your Cattleya, it perform or undergo periclinal division, in which the division of the cells is usually parallel to the plane of division, thus resulting to the increase in length rather than increase in size. So, dahil parallel siya dun sa plane of division, mag-i-increase in length yung cells mo. Hindi siya nag-grow in size, no? Pag perpendicular. 'Di ba? Pag perpendicular to the plane of division, yung sa paghaba, mas magwa-widen, no? In circumference naman yung mangyayari nun. But this time, yung division natin ay nagko-cause ng increase in length dahil parallel nga siya to the plane of division. So that's your tricotalic. We also have your promeristem. Pag sinabi naman nating promeristem, ito yung, di ba kung maalala nyo sa plant, yung yung plant mo, andun yung promeristem mo. Pag sinabi mong promeristem, di ba sa plant, meron kang initials plus the most recent derivatives of that. But yeah, parang din siyang ganun dito, although hindi nga lang plant, no, algae yung pinag-uusapan natin. But essentially, may promeristem din sila kung saan there are group or clusters of meristematic cells usually found in the apical portion of your organism. So, para nga lang din sa plant na nag-grow dun sa shoot niya. Na may promeristem ka. Okay? So, yeah, promeristem yan. Yung isa pa na mas maganda at mas unique is yung tinatawag nating intercalary type of growth. Ito naman yung in-exhibit ng ating mga laminaria, for example, kung saan dito sa transition zone na tinatawag, dyan makikita yung mga meristematic tissue. So, siya yung makikita mo in between your blade and yung ating stipe. Ayan, kung makita mo, meron ka pang gas bladder, flotation bladder dyan. So, siya yung transition zone. Yan yung meristematic in nature, yung tissue mo dyan. Okay. And then, meron din tayong tinatawag na meristoderm na both nagpe-perform ng periclinal and anticlinal division. The periclinal would result to increase in length. Yung anticlinal would result in increase in circumference of your organism. So, anong itsura niya? Ganito siya. So, meron kang meristoderm here. Meron kang din mga apical cells and promeristem dyan. So, essentially, meron kang perpendicular, meron kang division of cell that are perpendicular, and meron kang division of cell that are parallel, that will cause the increase in length. The perpendicular one would cause the increase in circumference of your organism. Now, moving on to the last part in terms of life history, we'll talk about your sexual hormones, especially your serotonin and your pheromones. So again, these are pheromones, or if you remember in the life history of your major life history, meron kang yung ating mga brown algae, sila yung may mga conceptacle, di ba? Yung parang, so ito yung plant mo, tapos usually meron siyang conceptacle, parang pabilog na ganyan. Diyan sa pabilog na yan, andyan sa loob yung reproductive part niya. So meron kang egg, meron kang sperm, parang ganon. And dahil doon, no, meron kang, usually, lalo na sa mga oogamous na type ng in terms of yung mga gamits nila, di ba? Oo, gamits kung saan yung babae, hindi naman, may isang mas malaki, tapos yung ano ay non-motile yung mas malaki na yon, di ba? Tapos may isang sperm. So may parang ganyan, parang may egg, tapos parang may sperm. So, oogamous yung tawag natin dyan. At dyan sa mga ganyang klaseng organism, they need to release the pheromones because the egg, the oogamete, need to attract the sperm to fertilize it. So yeah, ang basic biological effects ng mga sexual pheromones na to, like your serotonin or your serotonin, is the egg will attract the sperm, no, to the conceptacle. Yung conceptacle na yan, these are specialized cavities that contain your reproductive organ. So yeah, itong egg na to, or itong oogonium na to, oogamous na to, or oogamete na to, nasa loob ng conceptacle, and it needs to release this pheromone to attract the sperm inside that conceptacle. And also, it will release doon naman sa side, di ba? So oogonia yan, doon sa side ng anteridia, kapag may pheromones, it will trigger the explosive discharge of your sperm, or the motile one, the motile gamete, kumbaga. Now, we're back to our outline, and for this portion, we'll discuss the parade of taxa. So, ito na yung mas exciting na portion. So, meron lang tayong 4 na i-discuss dito na groups or orders of your class Phaeophyceae, your Dictyotales, your Ectocarpales, your Fucales, your Laminariales. So, unahin natin kay Dictyotales. So, your Dictyotales, yung pinakasiguro sikat dyan is si Dictyota. Oh, yeah, Dictyota pala. Yeah, Dictyota pala yung yung apical. So, Dictyotales. So, these are a very common species or group that is usually found in tropical climate, in warm waters. They have an isomorphic life history. In terms of reproduction, they have a unilocular sporangium with that produces 4 to 8 aplanospore inside them. They are oogamous, kung saan mas may maliit, may malaki. Sperm motile yung isa. And they have an apical or marginal apical cell type of growth. Examples here are your Dictyota and your Padina. Okay? So, tingnan natin kung ano itsura ng mga to. We have here your Dictyota dichotoma and Dictyota cervicornis. So, paano natin sila ma-differentiate from each other? Yung, so ayan, ito na yung kaninang figure natin. They have your apical meristems here. So, andyan lang makikita yung mga meristematic tissue. Then, sila mag-give rise. Yung mga apical meristems na yan, sila yung mag-give rise dun sa lower portion na eventually magmamature. So, ganyan yung itsura niya. So, ganun din dito, no? Pero mas mas curvy-curvy. So, paano mo nyo ma-differentiate yung isa't isa? Mas malaki si dichotoma from your cervicornis, usually 14 cm, although parang doble, no? And yung isa is 8 cm lang yung taas. Mas flat, kung makita nyo, si dichotoma than your cervicornis. But, meron kang degree of spiraling or twisting dun sa ating cervicornis. Kaya siya tinawag na cervicornis dahil sa cervicorn-like appearance niya. Pag sinabi natin cervicorn-like appearance, antler-like appearance. So, parang siyang deer antler. So, yeah, makita nyo naman yung semblance niya sa deer. So, mag-drawing ka dyan ng deer. 4 ang paa. So, parang ganun yung itsura niya. Pero mukhang ipis yung dinrawing ko or langgam. But yeah, that's your Dictyota cervicornis. And your Dictyota. And your dichotoma naman, siya na yung makikita mong mga epiphytes on your sargassum beds, sargassum leaves. Usually, ginagamit to as food, si dichotoma, for beer, desserts, and milkshake. And they are of importance for medicine as they are sources of antibacterial and antifungal compounds. Ganun din si cervicornis, they can serve as food, and they have been found to have an antibacterial effect on certain pathogens. Now we have your Padaina here. Padaina, pag dead na, it's Padaina. Yun yung running joke namin. Anyway, so si Padaina, SP here, these are your group or genus that has these very thick blades right here. And parang circular yung blades natin dito. And how you distinguish different Padaina species from each other is usually dun sa size ng blade and thickness ng blade na ito. And also, sometimes dun sa distance ng concentric rings nila. So, sometimes yung iba, they have a varying distance between your concentric aragonite or carbonate deposition, calcium carbonate deposition here. So, minsan, from top to bottom, no, mas malaki. Palaki siya ng palaki pag pataas ka. So, paliit pag papunta ka dun sa baba. So, ayan, kung makikita nyo dito, mas maliliit yung distance. Ayan, naglalag na. Mas maliliit yung distance here as compared dito sa taas. Mas malalaki yung distance. Mas maliliit yung... Nagbo-move kasi eh. Man. So, ayan. Mas maliliit yung distances dito as compared dun sa taas na mas malalaki yung distance between the concentric rings. Pero, different species, iba-iba yung ganyan. Yung iba naman, equidistance, no? Kahit mapa nasa base siya or nasa dito siya sa outer portion, pare-parehas lang yung distance ng rings. Yun lang yung gusto kong sabihin doon. Ay, sorry. Ayan. Moving on with your other order under the class Phaeophyceae, we have your Ectocarpales. Your Ectocarpales are heterotrichous, forms this heterotrichous talus. Heterotrichous talus yung nagpo-form dyan. They are usually prostrate to creeping disc, yung mga forms nila. Pag makikita mo in your marine habitats, they have two erect filamentous to bulbous or foliose type. Parang siyang mga bilog-bilog na bulbous. Yung iba naman parang dahon-dahon yung itsura. So, there are parenchymatous to pseudoparenchymatous representative. Mamaya makikita natin kung sino-sino sila. So, yung unang example natin dito is si Hydroclatrus clatrus and Hydroclatrus tenuis. So, si Clatrus clatrus, this is the one. Tenuis here. This is a very important human food for your salad, and it has this a little bit spiciness into it. Yeah, that's also why it is used as insect repellent in most countries. Now, how do you differentiate Hydroclatrus clatrus from Hydroclatrus tenuis? Tingnan nyo lang yung ating filaments, yung mga filaments natin. Usually, si Hydroclatrus clatrus have a larger filament and has smaller pores. Ayan, mas maliliit yung mga pores niyan. Kasi mas matik yung mga filaments niya. Yung ating Hydroclatrus tenuis naman, on the other hand, has smaller filament and larger pores. Kung makita nyo, mas malalaki yung pores, mas payat yung mga filaments. So, yan si tenuis, yan si Clatrus clatrus. Now, moving on with your Fucales. So, ganun lang, simple lang si Hydroclatrus lang yung pinag-usapan natin sa Ectocarpales. In the order Fucales, mas madami tayong mga representative. And these are the one that has a parenchymatous talus. So, parenchymatous yung mga talus nito, which usually is highly branched or dichotomous in nature. Meron kang mga flattened segments of midrib. And usually sila yung may mga gas vesicles. Yung gas vesicles na to ay usually na-form na mga flotation bladders kung tawagin. So, mga bladders yan na puno ng hangin. So, paano na-form yung flotation bladders na yan? Usually, so, isipin nyo lang parang yung stem yan, no? Yung stem niya yan. Or hindi siya stem, stipe siya. Yung stem-like, yung stipe natin, ang mangyayari dun sa certain region niya, dun sa cortex. So, sa cortex ng ating stipe, sa cortex ng ating stipe, ang mangyayari, magkakaroon ng thickening of the cortex. And then the medulla oblongata, the medulla of your stipe will disintegrate. So, yung medulla or yung inner portion magdi-disintegrate and it will fill with air. So, pupuno siya ng hangin. Pupuno siya ng hangin. Yung medulla na to. Pag napuno na siya ng hangin, magiging hollow space na yung medulla. So, parang ganyan. Napuno ng air. At yan na yung ating gas vesicle or yung ating gas bladder. Or flotation bladder, sorry. So, in terms of reproduction, your order Fucales has what we call apical meristem and your promeristem type of growth. Meron din silang, so growth to. In terms of reproduction, ito siya. Haploid generation or nagpo-form siya ng gametes kung saan meron kang conceptacles. Yung conceptacles, again, these are parang mga cubicle or so mga parang pouch yan kung saan makikita yung yung reproductive organs nung Fucales natin. So mga examples natin in temperate regions, mga fucus talaga kaya siya under Fucales. Ito yung type specimen natin dyan. Or type organism or genus. In tropical region, ito yung mas makikita natin, lalo na dito sa Paraguay, at kahit sa Bicol, sa Camarines Norte, ang pangit niya na kinakati ako pag may mga ganyan, sargassum. Kahit pag nagsiswimming kami sa Paraguay, kinakabisita namin yung mga sargassum na yan. Kasi sobrang dami nila. Sila yung nakakainis. Mga sargassum. Yeah. May experience niyan. Alam niyo naman siguro yung mga sargassum na yan. Nakakainis sa paningin. Parang ang dumi ng tubig. Anyway, sargassum, Phaeophyceae, and turbinaria. Yung representative in tropical regions. So, ito yung ating Phaeophyceae. This is Phaeophyceae cuneiformis. Kung makikita nyo sa Phaeophyceae cuneiformis, they have blades with elliptical vesicles. And usually, or elliptical gas vesicles, no? Yung mga blades natin, ayan. Nakita nyo, mas parang, siya. Ayan, may mga gas. Ayan. Makikita nyo, may mga enlarged portion or swelling gas vesicle yan. Pwede mong putok-putokin. Usually, ginagamit siya as animal feeds or fertilizer, insect repellent. At para siyang kunay sa Naruto. Kasi may serrated edge ka nung parang blades mo. And moving on with the next species that we have here, we have Turbinaria decurrens and Turbinaria ornata. Yung Turbinaria decurrens, maliit lang siya, 7 cm tall. And yung ating ornata is mas malalaki na maabot sa 17 cm tall. In top view, triangular yung mga decurrens natin. In top view naman, concave, no? Parang pabaon. Ayan, kung makikita nyo, may pabaon na area yung Turbinaria ornata. And also, yung ornata mo para siyang serrated edge na ayan, para kang may ngipin. No? Your Turbinaria decurrens are usually used for fertilizer, as human food, and also as insect repellent. So, moving on with your nakabuset na sargassum. Ayaw ko talaga ay sargassum. Pero, si sargassum mo, there are at least 10 species that is recorded here in the Philippines or across the world. 10 species. How do you differentiate them? First, look at the form of their hold pass. Yan yung mga tips and tricks. According kay Trono, tignan mo yung hold pass form nila. Nagkakaiba-iba yung hold pass form nila, yung itsura ng hold pass. Yung iba mas malaki, yung iba mas maliit. Yung iba mas branch or fibrous, yung iba hindi. In terms also of your blade characteristics, iba-iba yung mga itsura ng blade across different species. So ayan, yan yung mga flotation bladders natin. Kaya yung sargassum community, usually sa transatlantic ocean, makikita nyo sila, nagfo-float lang sila dyan. So that's your sargassum. And last but not least, we have your order Laminariales. In your order Laminariales, they are mostly parenchymatous in form. They are the largest known brown algae species in the world. At usually makikita nyo to sa temperate regions. In terms of reproduction, meron silang intercalary meristem. Sa growth to, in terms of growth, meron silang intercalary meristem. So, your blade, your stipe, dun sa intermediary portion na yun, sa intercalary meristem na yon, dun sa transition zone na yon, andun yung meristem nila. They also have oogametes, or they have an oogamous type of reproduction. Yung sporophyte morphology nila, yung malaking tao na to, malaking species na to, they have your stipe right here. They have the blade, and they have the hold pass right here. So, the blade, the leaf-like portion, the stipe is the stem-like portion, and your hold pass is tinatawag din siyang minsan na haptera. So, yung haptera na to is usually a microscopic rhizoidal. They have this microscopic rhizoidal branches that can even penetrate sand grains. No? Kaya niya, masyado siyang microscopic kasi yung mga haptera na yan. At dahil dyan, ini-increase niyan yung ability ng ating mga laminariales to penetrate substrate and to grip substrate more efficiently than any other group. Okay? So the most magnificent one that I know of under your laminariales is your giant kelp. So Macrocystis So si Macrocystis pyrifera, nakakainis magsulat. So si Macrocystis pyrifera, ito yung mga giant kelp. Sabi ko nga kanina, they can reach up to 30 to 100 meter in length. So they form this magnificent kelp forest along temperate oceans. Sobrang lalaki nito. At dahil malalaki yung mga Macrocystis pyrifera, yung mga giant kelp na to, they usually have to produce certain adaptation. Yung nasabi natin kanina, na meron kang high degree of different tissue differentiation sa mga to kasi sobrang gigantic na yung mga form na to. So in terms of sporophyte anatomy, meron kang epidermis, and their epidermis is composed of yung meristoderm nga natin. Nagpo-produce din sila ng mucilage. Now, mas interesting yung kanilang cortex and yung medulla. Yung cortex nila, mas malalaki yung mga cells nito at non-meristematic na yung cortex. But these are the photosynthetic one. So, lagyan natin dyan araw to denote na nagpo-photosynthesize yung mga yan. Hindi na gumalaw. Ayan. Yung medulla naman, ito na yung meron kang elongated and tangled cells. So, yung medulla mo has this certain differentiation na nagpo-form ng ating, yung inner portion na nagpo-form ng tinatawag nating mga sieve cells. So, parang din siyang mga sieve plates at sieve cells ng mga plants mo, like in your higher gymnosperm, and in your, yung mga plants natin, no? Yung mga land plants natin. So yeah, they have these sieve plates, or yung tinatawag nating pinagdikit ko na para hindi na ako magana. Trumpet cells. Yung mga trumpet cells na yan, these are totally enlarged seed pore, kumbaga, no? Which are a large portion, yung mga trumpet cells na yan, there are a large portion na usually they lack yung tinatawag nating companion cells and a vacuole. So they have no companion cells, they have no vacuole, but para siyang mga cells na malalaki inside your medulla. So ang purpose niyan is to transport material across the gigantic form of your laminarialis group and your macrocystis. So ayan siya, no? Yung itsura ng mga seed cells natin. So para siyang seed. Okay? So anyway, I hope everyone got to enjoy the lecture for today. Itong mga seed cells na to, yung mga seed pore na yan, I hope si Bio 119 and Bio 109 ay na prime din kayo for that. At dami nating mga na-recall na concepts, but essentially, napasadahan natin yung entirety ni Phaeophyceae for this lecture today. And to grow our knowledge on your phaeophytes and the algae, I also attach different materials or video materials that the previous section of your Bio 102 have prepared, including your chlorophytes, your rhodophytes, your phaeophytes, your cryptophytes, your apicomplexan group. Meron kaming mga prepare before na mga video materials. I hope you could enjoy. And kung wala na kayong katanungan at hindi kayo makapagtanong, kung gusto niyo magtanong, email nyo lang ako, chat nyo lang ako through Messenger and through my email account and through our VLE course site. But this is the end of our lecture activities and lecture recordings for our Bio 102 Psychology class. And I hope you enjoyed our stay for this semester. And salamat sa pagtangkilik sa ating mga lecture, pag-invite sa ating mga lecture. This is yours truly, Sir Patrick.